Good morning and welcome to Whisky, the Lockdown series, part 1. Today we're going to discuss the name whisky, how you measure the strength of whisky, the regions, and go into a little bit about just the difference between blends and single malts. So, the name whisky, originally Gaelic Whisky. Here in France, they call their spirit made from the local crops eau de vie. Eau de vie stands for water of life. In Latin, aqua vitae, water of life. Norwegian, aquavit, water of life. And Uskeba, surprise, surprise, stands for water of life. So how did that name go from Uskeba to whisky? Well, that's the fault of the English. They couldn't pronounce Uskeba, so Uskeba, through time, probably not a long time, changed to Uskeba, to Uske, eventually Uske changed to whisky, and that's the name we know it as now. Whisky, be careful, you spell whisky W-H-I-S-K-Y. You spell whisky with an E, E-Y, in Ireland and in America. And these are different products on the same principle. Another little anecdote is how they measured the strength of this spirit. And we're familiar, I've got a bottle here, we're familiar with it saying something like 40% by volume or 43% by volume, or ABV, which is by volume. And you get different volumes. Alcohol by volume, ABV. The older bottles used to say 70% proof, or 40% volume was equivalent to 70% proof. Proof was defined by if you poured the alcohol onto gunpowder and that gunpowder ignited, it was proof there was enough spirit there, so hence the name proof. So, an interesting story for you. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to go through the different regions and then go on to the spirits. So, behind me, I have got my classic malt collection, 6 whiskies representing 6 different regions. You'll see now a photograph with more detail of these whiskies. Right, now my collection there of the 6 whiskies, the regions start the same as in a fine or a wine regions in France. You'd start an evening drinking wine. You'd start with a light wine, a Chablis or something, and you work your way through the evening with different courses, and you'd finish off with the heavy wine, perhaps a Chateauneuf de Pape, a deep red, a nice full-bodied wine. And it's similar to whisky. I'm not advocating you drink whisky with a meal, but certainly I have whisky as a digestive after a meal, and I've got quite a collection, so I tend to choose which one I feel like at the time. But if I'm having a few, I would never start with a heavy whisky, a heavily peated Islay, for example. I'd always start with a lighter whisky, probably a Speyside or a lowland malt. So, going through the 6 regions, we've got Glenkinchie, a lowland malt. We then move on to Speyside, and I've got a lovely Cragganmore there, representing the Speyside Cragganmore whisky, Cragganmore distillery. We then go to Highland, and Dalwhinnie is the one that represents the Highland region. We then go to West Coast, and West Coast is represented by Oban. We then move across the water to Talisker and Island whiskies, and Talisker represents the Island whiskies. And then finally we've got that lovely rich Lagavulin, 16-year-old, one of my favourites, representing the Islay region. So those are primarily the 6 regions, and there's a chart showing you the different areas. Now, Okay, that's the 6 regions, and we'll go through that in further series. Let's just speak about the actual whiskies themselves. This whisky I took up earlier is a blend. A blend, in Scotch whisky terms, is a mix of grain whisky and malt whisky. Now, the age of the whisky in this bottle is certainly not much older than 5 years old. I mean, once the whisky's in the bottle, it doesn't change. So it's bottled. It's not like wine. So the whisky, when it was bottled, about 5 years old. Grain whisky is cheap to produce. It's made pretty quickly, high volumes, and it's quite coarse, really. And it's a cheaper whisky overall. Your percentage of malt whisky in here, and that'll be a number of different malt whiskies depending on the recipe for the particular whisky that's being made, is about 30% at best. It'll range between 29 for a cheap supermarket blend to 33 for a deluxe. But within that, you've got the age of the whiskies as well. So remember, these will be young whiskies in this one. Moving on to a nice deluxe, one of my favourites. I've got quite a few bottles of this left, even though this one's near empty. 12-year-old Johnnie Walker Black Label. Not red label, not blue label, it's black. There's quite a few there. Very nice whisky. You'll get that for mid-20s pounds in the shops. In France, you get it for about 20 euros. Every whisky in this is over 12 years old. The percentage of malt whisky in here is probably in the higher range. It's probably in the 32-33%, and the rest is the grain whisky. But we're looking at 12-year-old whisky. This is a nice smooth whisky, and I would recommend it. Now we're moving on to an example of a single malt whisky like those. We've got Mortlach 16-year-old. A nice Speyside, not a typical Speyside, but we'll go to that later. 43% volume, that's the strength. And this is malt made from one distillery, a single distillery. All the casks are a minimum of 16 years old, and this is a lovely smooth whisky. But it's different to, for example, this Mortlach I have here. This one's older. It's 60% by volume, 59.4% by volume. Limited edition, limited bottling. This will be his Rare Malt series. This has been produced for the Rare Malt series, and this will be, it's all cask strength, but it isn't a single cask. This is all from Mortlach. This is a single malt whisky. It'll be from less casks than the 16-year-old Mortlach I had before. And it's pretty unique. Once it's gone, it's gone. I move on to this third Mortlach, and the last example we're looking at today, the Manager's Dram from 2002, 19-year-old Mortlach. Again, numbered, signed by the distillery manager. Pretty unique, this one, 55.5%. This is a single cask. Again, once it's gone, there'll be less casks of this, probably 2,000 casks in total, and we'll go into the nuances of the whiskies further down the line in the series. I hope you found that interesting and useful. If you have, subscribe and like, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.